Soralaw invites you to dive into a haunting and mysterious story where an ordinary Super Bowl evening in America turns into a family's worst nightmare. On that day, what should have been just another football game became the backdrop for the sudden disappearance of an 11-year-old girl. The search for her and the disturbing secrets that unraveled will leave you on the edge of your seat. Join Soralaw as we uncover every detail and piece together the truth behind this chilling case. Are you ready to uncover the real story? February 1, 2004 was a busy day in the United States. The Super Bowl had its most watched game ever, with nearly 90 million people tuning in to see the New England Patriots defeat the Carolina Panthers in a 32-29 victory. The halftime show, featuring Justin Timberlake and Janet Jackson, became one of the most talked-about pop culture moments of the 2000s. For many football fans, the celebrations were just beginning, but in Sarasota, Florida, it was a very different story. A massive search was underway for a missing 11-year-old girl who had vanished without a trace. The truth was about to come out, a truth so disturbing it would leave a family, a community, a police force, and a country completely devastated. Carrie Jane Brewer was born on March 16, 1992, in Long Island to parents Joe and Susan. They divorced the following year, and Carrie moved to Sarasota, Florida with her mother, but she would see her family in Long Island during the winter and summer breaks, especially enjoying the Christmas period there. Susan later remarried and welcomed a son with her new husband, Stephen. Carrie was described as energetic, with her teachers calling her lovely and delightful, and her principal referring to her as a shining light. She loved her cat, Charlie, was obsessed with Jennifer Lopez, enjoyed going to the mall, and hanging out with her friends. She always greeted everyone at McIntosh Middle School, where she was in the 6th grade, with a big hug and a warm smile. She sang in the chorus and enjoyed playing sports. Quite simply, she was someone who loved life. On February 1, 2004, Carrie had spent the previous day with her friend, and the pair had a sleepover. Around 6:15 p.m., she set off back to her house just 1 mile away as she was due to watch the Super Bowl with her family. Her friend's mother decided to call Susan to check if it was okay for Carrie to be walking home alone. Susan said she didn't want her daughter walking by the bridge road as it could be busy, and she hadn't given Carrie permission to walk alone. She spoke to her husband, Stephen, who then drove off to pick her up. The streets were somewhat quieter as most families were gathered around the television for the Super Bowl, but as Stephen drove around the streets, panic began to set in. He couldn't see Carrie anywhere. She had gone without a trace. Just 1 hour later, 911 was called, and Lily Harper was reported as missing. The police were dispatched and soon arrived at Carrie's house. They spoke to all of Carrie's friends to see if they had seen or heard from her and knocked on neighbors' doors in hopes that someone had information. They also spoke to the friend whose house she had stayed at and her friend's mother, who described Carrie as being a bit upset because her mother and stepdad had been arguing. Carrie had wanted to leave early and go home to spend time with Susan. As news began to spread, the searches grew larger, and the police continued until 3 o'clock in the morning, but there was still no sign of Carrie. It had soon been 12 hours since she was last seen. As her classmates arrived at school, they were all hoping to see her there, but she didn't turn up. After she failed to make it to school, the police decided to bring in bloodhounds to see if they could trace her scent using one of her pillowcases. Ruby, the bloodhound, tracked her scent to behind E's car wash at 4715 Bridge Road, but it suddenly stopped. The police quickly sealed off the area and spoke with the owner of the car wash, Mike Evanoff, who told them there were surveillance cameras operated by a motion sensor. Footage from one camera showed the busy main road, but an empty parking lot. Another camera from a different angle also showed nothing. They then checked the camera at the back of the car wash, which was triggered by movement. As they pressed play, it showed a recording taken from 6:21 p.m. on the evening of Carrie's disappearance. It showed a young girl in a red shirt and blue jeans with a pink backpack, exactly what Carrie was wearing the day she was last seen. Suddenly, another person came into view, a man. The man in the video was approximately 5 feet 8 inches with dark hair and tattoos on his arm. He was wearing a mechanic's top with a name tag that was too blurry to make out. He stopped in front of her, and the pair spoke for a few seconds before he grabbed her arm and led her away. Although the footage was only a few seconds long, it painted a terrifying picture, and it was clear to all the officers that Carrie was in grave danger. Carrie's stepfather, Stephen, was asked to go down to the station to talk to the police. He said he knew something was wrong because Carrie just didn't behave this way. She was always sure to call and keep her parents informed of where she was and what she was doing. Based on Stephen's phone records, he was immediately ruled out as a suspect, but he did say something interesting. As he was driving down Bridge Road looking for Carrie, he had spotted a red truck that was also driving up and down the street, a truck that had pulled into the car wash. He said that when he went to her friend's house, the same house Carrie had set off from, a red truck was parked outside. He was sure it was the same one he had seen earlier. The man in the footage was wearing a mechanic's uniform, something often worn by tow truck drivers. The owner of the truck, a man named Ron, lived at Carrie's friend's house, and he had been there the night before. The police immediately brought him in for questioning. Ron confirmed that Carrie had spent the night at his house on Saturday. He stated that on Sunday morning, he woke up, got ready for work as usual, and didn't see her again after that. When asked if he had worn the same clothes to work on Sunday, he mentioned he had worn a Super Bowl shirt. When shown a photograph of Carrie with a man in the car wash, Ron denied it was him, even though the image bore some resemblance. Despite this, Ron insisted it wasn't him and suggested the police verify his time at work. The police spoke to Ron's boss, who confirmed Ron had been working, and his time cards backed this up. A search was carried out of his truck, but nothing was found, and Ron was ruled out as a suspect. This left the police with no leads as to who the man in the footage was or where he had taken Carrie. The footage was also shown to Susan, but she too had no idea who the man was. This alarmed the community. As Joe said, there were people less than 300 feet away from the abduction. It was daylight, yet no one had noticed. A reward of $25,000 was offered for any information that could lead to catching her kidnapper. The police decided to recheck the footage to see if it could provide any more clues as to who this man was. When they rewound the footage further, they saw a pale yellow 1992 Buick Century station wagon arriving in the parking lot just 3 minutes before Carrie was kidnapped. The Buick then drove down Bridge Road and braked just outside the car wash to turn in. This finally gave them another lead. The search continued, with many people coming out to look for her. Missing persons posters were stapled up and handed out, and the community was determined to leave no stone unturned. The mayor called Carrie Sarasota's child, and assured everyone they wouldn't rest until she was found. Carrie's mother, Susan, appeared at a press conference, tearfully pleading, "I want to address my Carrie, I love you. I have this phone on at all times. I'm begging and pleading, please help me bring my daughter home." Her father added, "Carrie, if you can hear this, your mom's at home waiting for you." February 3, 2004, it had now been 2 days since Carrie's abduction. A woman was watching the news and saw the footage from the car wash. She got her husband to watch it as well, and they both agreed they knew the man. He was a former business associate. She said, "I worked with him at the shop, so I knew what he looked like, the sneakers, the way his hair was cut, the way he walked, and then when I watched him reach for the girl, I knew it was him." Her husband called the police and provided the man's name and address to Detective Vincent Reaver. Detective Reaver and another officer headed over to the address provided in an unmarked car, and they met 2 more police officers. A neighbor told them someone was definitely home, so the officers knocked on the front door and waited. There was no response. One of the officers called a supervisor for advice, and they discovered that the man in question was actually on probation. He had had 2 previous parole violations but had not been remanded. They got in touch with his probation officer and asked her to come down to the house. Around 45 minutes later, a woman arrived at the property. She was the man's sister. She agreed to get him and bring him out. Standing in front of them was Joseph Peter Smith, 37 years old, a father of 3, originally from Brooklyn. Joseph Smith had a long list of previous criminal convictions and was currently unemployed. He had at least 13 prior arrests in the state dating back to 1993 for possession of heroin and prescription drug fraud. He had spent 17 months in custody, and just 8 days after his release, he was arrested again for possession of cocaine and was put on probation for 3 years. He had also been arrested, charged, and later acquitted for kidnapping and false imprisonment. He had recently violated the terms of his probation but was released. The woman who had seen him on the news was not the first person to give detectives his name. Of the over 800 tips they had received since releasing the footage of Carrie's abduction, several other people had called in to say they believed the man was Joseph Smith. He drove a brown Lincoln, not the Buick station wagon seen driving down Bridge Road and braking just outside the car wash. While officers tried to trace the owner of the Buick, 2 detectives spoke to Joseph Smith. They asked him about his whereabouts on the day Carrie was abducted and if he had been at the car wash. He denied being there. When the officers asked to look more closely at his tattoos, he became defensive, asking why they were talking to him. He was told they were investigating a kidnapping. He said he didn't know what they were talking about. They then showed him a photograph from the surveillance footage. "That looks like me, but it's not me," he said. Joseph agreed to let the officers search his vehicle and the room he rented. He didn't appear nervous and was cooperative with the detectives. However, during the search of his room, they found nothing linking him to Carrie, though they did find a mechanic's uniform with a name tag on the front. A search of his car was also conducted, and drug paraphernalia was found, so he was arrested for violating the terms of his parole and possession of drug paraphernalia. As his brown Lincoln was being searched, one of the owners of the home he was renting a room in, a woman named Naomi, arrived at the property driving a yellow Buick station wagon. The officers asked her if she knew anything about Joseph's whereabouts on the day Carrie was last seen. She explained that around 6:30 p.m., Joseph had been on the phone with his estranged wife, which meant he now had an alibi. They were back at square one, and time was running out to find Carrie, but just a few hours later, new information would come to light. Naomi's husband, Jeff, arrived at the station driving the Buick station wagon. He said his wife had not recalled it correctly and had gotten the times wrong. Jeff recounted that on the day of Carrie's disappearance, Joseph had come out and asked to borrow the car, saying he'd only be gone for 15 minutes. Jeff noticed that when Joseph returned, he looked unusually clean and well-rested, which struck him as odd. Jeff also observed that the vehicle's back seat had been put down and some items had been moved around, which made him suspicious. Jeff handed the Buick over to the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office for testing and examination. With Jeff's new information, Joseph's whereabouts during the crucial time of the abduction were no longer accounted for, and they now knew he had been driving the station wagon. Joseph was read his Miranda rights, and he asked for an attorney. On the evening of February 4th, Joseph's brother, John, arrived at the police department and was interviewed by the FBI. John said he and Joseph were not on good terms and that on the evening of February 1st, the day Carrie was kidnapped, Joseph had called him around 8 p.m., but John didn't speak to him. The following day, John and his girlfriend were watching television when they saw the footage of Carrie's abduction on the news. They both recognized the man immediately. John particularly noted the way the man walked, which matched Joseph's distinctive gait due to back surgery. Later that night, around 11 p.m., Joseph appeared at John's house, seemingly under the influence of something. John allegedly refused to let his brother come inside because Joseph had previously ogled his girlfriend's teenage daughter on various occasions. Although Joseph was in his mechanic's uniform as usual, he wasn't wearing his typical tennis shoes. He was wearing boots, something he never wore. All Joseph said was, "You want to talk to me about something?" John told him no and shut the door. When Joseph arrived at work the next day, he reportedly acted strangely, repeatedly washing his hands even though they were clean. He also told his boss that he might need to go out of state suddenly and at any time. John told the officers, "I don't have any concrete evidence. It's just, it looks like him, it walks like him. The more I look at that video, the more I look at him, it's just, well, a total resemblance. If it's not him." They needed Joseph to confess if they wanted any chance of finding Carrie. John said that if Joseph were responsible, he would never admit to it, he would die with that secret. He advised the FBI to try and gather more evidence. It was announced that the detectives were seeking the help of NASA to enhance the image from behind the car wash and see if they could determine what the name tag said. They were able to, it said Joe. The arrest report also stated that Joseph had maneuvered the Buick in a premeditated manner to conceal his actions, allowing him to approach Carrie. The evidence was stacking up, but soon the case would take another turn. On February 5, 2004, Joseph spoke to his brother and mother. After an hour and a half, John came out and said Joseph came close but didn't say anything. Neither John nor his mother was debriefed by officers, and no surveillance was placed on them. After leaving the station that evening, John called the FBI and said, "I guess you heard. What do you want me to do?" The FBI was confused. What on earth was he talking about? John thought his phone had been tapped, but it hadn't. It then clicked. Joseph had obviously called his brother and told him something about Carrie, and John, believing his phone had been tapped, was now calling to give them the information. 3 officers, including 2 FBI agents, went straight to John's property, and there the truth would come out. John gave them directions to where she was, 6221 Proctor Road near I-75. At 1 a.m., in some thick underbrush in a field behind the Central Church of Christ, Carrie's body was found. She was naked from the waist down except for a sock on her right foot. There was a deep ligature wound around her neck. The FBI officers took John back to the police department to talk to him again. He admitted that when he came out of the interview room and said Joseph hadn't said anything, he was lying. Joseph had actually said, "I'm sorry I did this to you." Their mother then left the room, and Joseph continued talking, saying he had taken what he thought was cocaine on the day of her abduction, and everything that followed was a blur. John said it felt like Joseph was afraid to say, "You know she's dead," so he just said, "Okay, Joe, she's dead." "Fine, where is she? Where is she? We've got to find her. Where is she?" After they left the station, John and his mother had gone to the church to look but hadn't found anything. Joseph then told them she was in a field behind the church. John told the agents he hadn't said this before because he didn't believe what Joseph had said, and he hadn't actually confessed to killing Carrie. John said he had gone because he was curious to see if anything Joseph said was accurate. He said if he were to find Carrie alive, his plan was to free her, give her money, take a photograph to sell to the media, and then use that money to hire a good lawyer for Joseph. Joseph would eventually confess to sexually assaulting Carrie in the vehicle. He then admitted he had violently raped her. A storm was rolling in, so the decision was made to leave her body in situ overnight and move it in the morning to prevent her body from being photographed from above. The police department contacted the White House, which granted a special no-fly zone for the area. Her body was later examined by the Sarasota medical examiner, who determined that she had been dragged into the field and strangled from behind. Ligature marks on her wrists indicated she had been bound. Joseph's DNA was found on her shirt, and it was later reported that the chance of a random Caucasian man having a matching DNA profile was 1 in 32 quintillion. The evidence didn't stop there. 2 of her hairs were found in the Buick, and there were 7 fibers in the vehicle that matched Carrie's red shirt. Joseph had dumped her clothes and pink backpack in different bins in a bid to cover his tracks. It was Sheriff Bill Borwell who had the task every officer dreads he had to tell Susan. He headed over to her house and broke the news. Susan screamed, "He killed my daughter. He murdered my baby." Sheriff Bill Borwell then had to tell the public. With his voice breaking as he spoke, he said, "The body of a beautiful 11-year-old girl, Lily Harper, has been found. Joseph Smith is under arrest for the abduction and murder of Carrie." Friends, family, and the local community, who had searched tirelessly to try and find her, gathered at the church to lay flowers and pay their respects. McIntosh Middle School announced that following the news of her body being found, they were going to open up to the community and offer grief counseling for those affected. The impact of the crime was so enormous that parents were too frightened to even let their daughters walk to the mailbox. The community held a vigil outside her house, showing Carrie and her family just how much they meant to them. "We love you," Carrie was written on banners and posters. Her father, Joe, offered his thanks to everyone involved, saying, "I just want to thank all of the people behind me for their efforts to find my daughter and the community that was so involved. I just want to thank everybody for all they've done." On February 9th, Joseph spoke to his mother. The conversation went as follows: "Mother, oh Joe, the best thing you can do is try to explain it was an accident." Joseph, "But it was an accident, Mom." Mother, "I know that, Joe. You don't think I would do that on purpose, Mom." Mother, No, I don't think so at all, Joe. Not at all. I know you better than that. But everyone is up in arms: the community, the press, the governor, the mayor. You just don't know." At a memorial service for Carrie held on February 10th, many people attended, including Sheriff Bill Borwell. For everyone, this was the devastating outcome they had hoped and prayed would not happen. February 20th, 2004, Joseph Peter Smith was charged with kidnapping, 1 count of sexual battery, and was also indicted on a count of first-degree murder. As this was Florida, he could face a death sentence. Captain Jeff Bell said, "We now stand ready to complete our obligation and assure you that he will pay the ultimate price for what he did to her." As he sat in custody awaiting trial, a letter from Joseph to his brother was intercepted. It had been written in code, which was later deciphered. The letter said, "I wish I had something juicy to say. Okay, the backpack and clothes went in 4 different dumpsters. I left it out in the open. I dragged the body to where it was found. Destroy this after deciphering it and shut up." Before the trial could start, Carrie's grandmother passed away, with some saying she had died of a broken heart. Her grandfather left the United States and moved to Europe, where he too would later pass away. Carrie's uncle drove his truck into a tree and died as a result of his injuries. It was reported that some believed he had done this with the intention of taking his own life. Month before the trial was due to begin, Joseph's lawyer tried to have the car wash video and the confession he allegedly gave his brother in prison thrown out. The lawyer argued that the prosecution could not prove that the digital images and the time and date stamps on the video were authentic and correct, so therefore, they should not be used. He also argued that when the FBI got Joseph's brother to talk to him after he had already exercised his right to remain silent and asked for an attorney, this led to an illegal interrogation. An FBI agent said that it was John who had wanted to talk to his brother to see if he would answer any questions, and only did so after the authorities had been approved for the visit by Joseph's lawyers. It was now time for Joseph Smith to go on trial. The evidence was strong: the footage from the car wash, the evidence from the Buick, the fact he was driving the Buick at the time, the DNA found on her clothes, and his ability to tell them where her body was. It was a difficult and confronting trial. For those who had held out hope, searched for her, and been there for her loved ones, it was extremely tough to sit through the details of what had happened to her. One of the people to testify was John, Joseph's brother, but this was not without its problems. Prosecutor Deborah Reaver asked Judge Andrew Owens to declare John as an adverse witness, also known as a hostile witness. At this point, John was facing charges for drug possession and armed robbery. It was reported that John had admitted that during his testimony, he was actually high on crack cocaine. After all of the evidence had been presented to the jury, they soon came back with a verdict. Just a few weeks later, on December 1st, a jury voted 10-2 that Joseph Smith should be executed by lethal injection. Joseph asked the judge to spare him for the sake of his family. However, on March 15 the following year, the judge officially sentenced Joseph Smith to death for his crimes. Carrie endured unspeakable trauma, which began at the time of her kidnapping. The image of the defendant taking her arm and leading her away will no doubt forever be etched in our minds. At 11 years of age, there is no doubt she was aware of her dire predicament and that she had little or no hope of survival. Her death was consciously and pitilessly calculated and premeditated. Joseph Smith, based on your actions, you have forfeited your right to live freely among us. May God have mercy on your soul. After the death penalty was reached by the jury, Joseph offered a statement that said in part, "I want you to know that I take full responsibility for the crimes. I don't know how this all happened. I was very angry at myself and very high. I knew that getting high was wrong, but I could not stop. I'm not trying to make excuses for what happened, but I really don't remember much about anything on that day." Following his death sentence, Carrie's stepfather Stephen said afterward, "I thought I'd feel a lot different, but it still hurts. It doesn't change anything. I just feel that Carrie has been heard. Her soul is gone now. Now it's a matter of time to wait to watch Joe Smith die." Carrie's mother was not in court for the sentencing as she was being held in prison on prostitution and drug charges. She said that she had turned to drugs to numb the agony of losing Carrie. After being sent to death row, Joseph launched several appeals against his sentence, but none of his appeals had been successful so far. However, everything would soon change. The defendant is guilty of murdering Carrie, and Joseph Smith was sentenced to death. But this week, a circuit judge ordered that he be given a new sentencing trial. This all stems from a recent Supreme Court ruling requiring juries to be unanimous when sentencing someone to death. Carrie's father, Joe Brewer, is furious. They seem indifferent to the victims and their families. They think they can just do these things without affecting people, but it affects people a lot. He does not deserve to live at the U.S. taxpayers' expense any longer. Joe Brewer and his family are writing letters asking the governor and the attorney general to step in. Do the right thing. Do what the state of Florida promised my family and me, and that is to put Joseph Smith to death. And that's, he killed my daughter. In 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court declared the Florida law unconstitutional since the death penalty could be imposed without a unanimous jury verdict. In 2018, the Florida Supreme Court also dropped Smith's death sentence, but it was reinstated in 2020. Now, nearly a year later, the Florida Supreme Court has ordered a new sentencing hearing for Smith. A circuit court will only consider Smith's sentence and not his conviction. A hearing date has yet to be set. "I'll lend you for a little while a child of mine," God said. Don Batts comes to this place to reflect about Lily Harper more than most. They found her right under the edge of just about where the rock is. He's the caretaker of her memorial at the Central Church of Christ. He comes here to reflect about Brewer and remembers his own granddaughter, who was murdered years ago. When you lose someone, a family member, it's just nice to have a place to go, sit, and enjoy the solitude. He's unsure what to think of the news that Brewer's killer, Joseph Smith, is going to be resentenced. "I have real mixed feelings about it. Another life taken doesn't bring Carrie back. But at the same time, like I say, justice should be carried out to whatever extent of the law." Joe was very critical of the justice system, saying, "I feel so let down by the system because Joseph Smith was on parole before he got to my daughter, and he was supposed to go back to jail for 5 years if he violated. He did violate. He was, quote, passed out with a bag of cocaine in a parking lot. Instead of them giving him the consequence that they said they would, they gave him drug offender probation, which is just semantics, and that's why my daughter's not here today. Then they dragged this thing on from 2005 to 2021, and it's still going, and it's not even done yet. So I have a lot of venom and disdain for the criminal justice system." After browsing the internet, Joe realized that he wasn't the only parent grieving a child who had allegedly been killed by someone on parole or probation. He said he realized this was actually a nationwide problem. Joe contacted Representative Katherine Harris and asked her to do something so that Carrie's death would not be in vain and no more parents would have to go through something similar. Katherine Harris later introduced legislation named Carrie's Law. She said at a press conference, "We must act now to protect our children from the criminal repeat offenders who would use society's second chance to commit more acts of violence." Representative Nick Lampson from Texas, a co-sponsor of the bill, added, "While we cannot prevent these events, we are obliged to respond and to help protect our communities. The law would take federal felons back into custody if they were to commit another felony offense, an offense intending to result in sexual contact with someone under the age of 16, or a crime of violence." It was also going to add a year-long extension to the Amber Alert grants, which help issue alerts about abducted and at-risk children. Due to the cost that the new bill would likely incur, it was met with some pushback, with the state's top prison official saying it would cost nearly $1 billion to put those with criminal records like Joseph Smith back in custody. Joe said in response to this, "I find it very offensive that they say it costs too much money. No one has the right to put a price on my daughter's head or any other child's." Carrie's Law initially didn't pass due to there not being enough time, but Representative Harris said she was going to reintroduce it and expand its scope. The meat of this is still going to be the meat of Carey's Law, but the expansion would be to make sure we are closing other gaps on the exploitation of children. There is nothing more traumatic than a child being exploited or murdered. Everyone suffered greatly when Carey's death occurred, so we just want to make certain that scenario won't happen again. Despite this, Carey's Law was not reintroduced. It's hard to believe 10 years ago this week a little Sarasota girl was abducted at a car wash, sparking a search that captured the attention of the nation. 10 years ago today, the world witnessed a kidnapping caught on tape. Lily Harper would be found days later, murdered. She was only 11. Her body was left behind a church, and now a decade later, that church still honors that little girl by trying to protect other children. Such a tragedy for Carey, but it's helped a lot of other kids now, said Stephen Kaner, Lily Harper's stepfather, addressing the large crowd gathered at the Central Church of Christ. Her mother, Susan Brewer, was too emotional to speak at the place where her daughter's body was found 4 days after her abduction. Hopefully, it made kids aware and adults aware, that it can happen to you. You hear about it being somewhere else, and you never think it'll happen here in your backyard. The mass search and the tragic discovery were hard to forget, even for seasoned officers who attended the memorial. For something like this to happen to her, I think it is probably our worst nightmare, but it also gave us that sense of vigilance, and that's what I think really drove us all together to try to bring him to justice. Joseph Smith sits on death row, but in the past 10 years, the church has worked with the community, sponsoring 8 kid safety rallies among other campaigns, all in memory of a little girl gone too soon. We're going to keep Carey's memory alive. This will always be a place in this community where you can come, where you can remember, and where you can recommit yourself to taking care of the kids in our community. Bradenton Police Department's Assistant Chief, Paul McQuaid, later confirmed that Joseph Smith was also now a suspect in another murder, the murder of 25-year-old Tara Riley. He added that he intended to have officers talk to Joseph Smith about it while he was on death row. In March 2000, Tara Riley's naked body was found in a retention pond behind a Walmart in Florida. Tips had come in, but there was nothing concrete. She had been seen arguing in the parking lot with someone, and 2 years after her murder, the police questioned someone who matched the description, but there wasn't enough evidence to file charges. Before long, her case went cold, and her files gathered dust. Any hope of catching her killer faded more and more as the years passed. 6 years later, though, in a recorded phone call, her name resurfaced as Joseph sat in prison. He had a call with his brother and mother. They were asking him a series of questions. One of them was, did they ask about Tara? Joseph's brother John actually knew Tara Riley, the two had worked together. John said that just before her death, she had turned Joseph down, and this humiliation, he believed, was the motivation for killing her. John said, I'm glad that story put a kick in the authorities, but's to do something about it. She was a sweet girl. She had a long life ahead of her. Way too early to depart this earth. I hope they solve this murder before my brother dies. He added that he believed his brother was responsible for her murder. 17 years after Carey's abduction and murder, there was a breaking news announcement. 55-year-old Joseph Smith had died at the Union Correctional Institution on July 26, 2021. His cause of death was not immediately announced, but it was later reported that he had died as a result of liver cancer, though other sources said it was after contracting hepatitis C. The Florida State Attorney's Office said in a statement, while nothing can bring back Carey, we are grateful that her family, her friends, and the entire Sarasota community will finally have closure and will not have to endure any further court proceedings to bring him to justice. Carey's father said he felt wonderful when he heard that Joseph had died. It's long overdue. The inept and corrupt criminal justice system could not get it done, so the natural order of things finally took care of it. Joseph Smith was never charged in connection with Tara Riley's murder, and her case remains unsolved. The truth about his potential involvement with other crimes, including hers, will now likely never be known. John, Joseph's brother, said he wished his brother had confessed. He never truly confessed, I don't think, about Carey, and he definitely didn't confess about Tara. He died a coward, that's all. Now, loved ones are reaching out again, pleading for help to restore the memorial garden for 11-year-old Lily Harper. It's dying. People are forgetting. At one time, dozens of volunteers came every week to care for the memorial garden, but now it's neglected and vandalized. Family friend Cher Langworthy, along with her husband and Carrie's cousin, has worked the last 3 weeks trying to restore the garden. I want her legacy, her memory to live on, and I want it to be kind of like an awareness thing, for parents to take their kids here and teach them what can happen. Local volunteers and businesses are helping to maintain the garden. The impact of the murder of Lily Harper was far-reaching and long-lasting. For her devastated mother, Susan, her life was never the same. We're learning that Susan Brewer has passed away, a newscaster reported. Brewer is the mother of Lily Harper. Over the years, a lot of folks have been sad about Carrie's death. Tonight, they are all grieving for her mom. Susan was a very dedicated mother, and she loved her daughter very much, Pastor Rod Myers of the Central Church of Christ remembered. Susan Brewer died on Monday at the age of 47. Myers recalled one encounter with Brewer very vividly. Susan and I and Sheriff Borwell at the time all came out, and we had a prayer near where Carrie was found. That was a very meaningful time to me. Lily Harper was just 11 years old. She had so much to do and so much to see. A life of endless promise clearly lay ahead of her. She was someone who made people feel loved, always being sure to greet her friends with a big hug and a friendly smile. And it is through those happy memories that her spirit continues to live on and be with those who knew and loved her. As her father Joe said, "My family and I, we talk about her, and we have photos of her all around the house. She's in our hearts and minds all the time." As we close this chapter, we hope you were as captivated by Carrie's story as we were. But remember, this is just the beginning. At Soralaw, we have countless more intriguing stories that will both surprise and move you. So stay tuned because the next video will dive into another gripping case that you won't want to miss. If you enjoyed this deep dive and want to be the first to know when our next story drops, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Join our community at Soralaw, where we bring you closer to the truth, one story at a time. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.